The first time I saw my own face after a year in captivity, it wasn't in a mirror. It was standing on the balcony of my house, laughing. My husband had his arm around her waist. The woman wore my silk robe. My wedding ring glittered on her finger. And somehow, nobody looked surprised. Not the house staff. Not my mother. Not even the security guards who had once sworn to protect me. For 12 months, I had survived on hope. Hope that someone was searching. Hope that my family refused to believe I was gone. Hope that my husband loved me enough to tear the world apart looking for me. Instead, I stood outside the gates of the estate I had built and watched another woman become me. The worst part wasn't that she looked like me. The worst part was how comfortable everyone seemed with the replacement. That was the moment I realized something terrifying. I hadn't come home to a family that missed me. I had come home to a family that had already moved on. And before this nightmare ended, I would discover they hadn't replaced me because they thought I was dead. They replaced me because I was worth more to them missing than found.
Rain tapped softly against the cemetery tents. Black umbrellas drifted across the hillside like moving shadows. Everything smelled of wet grass and freshly turned earth. I stood at the very back of the crowd, hidden beneath a borrowed coat. A surgical mask covered half my face. No one looked twice at me. Why would they? Dead women don't attend their own funerals. At the front stood my husband, Ethan Mercer. The man who once claimed he couldn't sleep unless he heard my breathing beside him. Today he looked heartbroken. His shoulders sagged. His eyes appeared red. His voice cracked when he thanked everyone for coming. It was an impressive performance. Almost convincing. Until I noticed one detail. His watch. The expensive Swiss watch he'd bought 3 days after my accident. The watch he thought nobody knew about. A man consumed by grief doesn't reward himself with luxury purchases. A man celebrating victory does. Standing beside him was my younger sister, Vanessa. Perfect posture. Perfect makeup. Perfect tears. She cried at exactly the right moments. Touched exactly the right people. Accepted exactly the right condolences. Watching her was like watching an actress hit every mark on a stage. Except I knew something nobody else did. I knew what her hands felt like. Because those were the hands that shoved me. A gust of wind swept across the cemetery. The minister continued speaking. Words about loss. Memory. Family. Legacy. The usual collection of comforting lies people tell around graves. I barely heard him. My attention remained fixed on Vanessa. She leaned closer to Ethan. His hand found hers. Only for a second. Tiny. Almost invisible. But not invisible enough. The affair wasn't new. I'd suspected it for months. Maybe longer. The signs had been there. Late-night phone calls. Conversations that stopped when I entered rooms. Inside jokes neither bothered explaining. The strange tension whenever we were all together. I had ignored it because love makes intelligent people stupid. And because I couldn't imagine either of them crossing a line that deeply. I underestimated them. Terribly. A week earlier. Everything still looked normal. At least from the outside. I was the CEO of Mercer Biotech. A healthcare technology company my grandfather built from a 2-room laboratory and $40,000. By the time I inherited it, the company employed thousands of people. The board trusted me. Investors trusted me. The market trusted me. Unfortunately. So did my family. Trust is valuable. That's why people steal it. The first crack appeared on a Tuesday afternoon. Nothing dramatic. Just a routine audit. I was reviewing international accounts with my chief financial officer. A boring task. The kind executives complain about. The kind that occasionally saves your life. The conference room overlooked the city skyline. Sunlight reflected off the glass towers outside. My CFO, Martin, was halfway through a quarterly report when he suddenly stopped talking. His forehead tightened. He looked back at the screen. Then at me. Then at the screen again. Claire. His voice sounded strange. Did you authorize a transfer from the Cayman account? I frowned. What Cayman account? The silence that followed lasted maybe 3 seconds. It felt much longer. Martin slowly turned his monitor toward me. My name appeared at the top of the documents. Claire Elizabeth Mercer. Authorized account holder. Authorized signature. Authorized beneficiary. Everything looked legitimate. Except for one problem. I had never seen the account before. The balance contained nearly $38 million. My stomach tightened. Not because of the amount. Because of the implications. Money like that doesn't appear accidentally. Someone had built an entire financial structure using my identity. And they had done it carefully. Professionally. Patiently. I spent the next 4 hours reviewing records. Every document carried my digital authorization. Every transfer appeared legal. Every trail eventually led back to me. The setup was brilliant. Whoever created it wanted investigators to reach one conclusion. That I was hiding money. That I was committing fraud. That I was the criminal. When I finally left the office, night had fallen across the city. Rain streaked the windshield as I drove home. The mansion sat beyond a line of iron gates surrounded by old oak trees. The place looked beautiful at night. Warm lights glowing behind massive windows. Safe. Familiar. Home. I remember sitting in my parked car. Engine running. Watching the house. Something felt wrong. Not dangerous. Not yet. Just wrong. Like arriving halfway through a conversation nobody invited you to. Then I saw movement. Second floor balcony. My bedroom balcony. 2 figures. Ethan. And Vanessa. Standing very close together. Far closer than a brother-in-law and sister-in-law should ever stand. Neither knew I was watching. Neither knew my world was already beginning to collapse. That should have been enough. A reasonable person would have left. Collected evidence. Called a lawyer. Protected themselves. But betrayal rarely arrives one piece at a time. It arrives in layers. And curiosity is often stronger than fear. I walked inside. The smell of expensive perfume floated through the foyer. Laughter echoed from somewhere deeper in the house. The staff had already gone home. Only family remained. My family. The people I trusted most. The people preparing to destroy me. I just didn't know it yet. That night changed everything. Because before sunrise, I would discover the offshore account wasn't the real secret. The real secret was why it existed. And by the time I learned the answer, I would already be standing at the edge of a cliff. The next morning, I pretended everything was normal. That's the strange thing about betrayal. Even after you see it, part of you keeps hoping you're wrong. Part of you searches for an explanation that hurts less. A misunderstanding. A coincidence. Anything. But reality has a habit of arriving uninvited. And when it does, it rarely knocks. I spent most of Wednesday reviewing the offshore account. The deeper I dug, the worse it became. Shell companies. Layered transactions. Forged approvals. Insurance structures tied to my name. Some of the paperwork stretched back nearly 18 months. 18 months. Someone hadn't simply planned to steal from me. Someone had been building an exit strategy. Patiently. Quietly. For a very long time. Around noon, I called my attorney. A woman named Rebecca who had worked with my family for years. I trusted her. Probably more than I trusted most relatives. I asked her to meet me privately. No assistance. No emails. No records. Just coffee. And answers. The cafe overlooked the river. Rain clouds drifted across the water. Rebecca arrived 10 minutes late. Which was unusual. She never arrived late. Not once in 6 years. That bothered me more than I expected. I showed her everything. The account. The transfers. The signatures. The insurance policies. For nearly 20 minutes she said nothing. She simply read. Turning pages slowly. Methodically. Her expression growing heavier with every document. Finally she looked up. And for the first time in our professional relationship, she looked afraid. Not surprised. Afraid. Claire, she said quietly. You need to disappear for a few days. I stared at her. What? You need to leave. The seriousness in her voice sent a cold ripple through my chest. Why? Rebecca glanced around the cafe before leaning closer. Because if these documents are real. She paused. Choosing her words carefully. Then somebody already believes you're a problem. A problem. Not a victim. Not a target. A problem. The distinction mattered. Because problems get solved. My coffee suddenly tasted bitter. I remember staring out the window. Watching rain slide down the glass. Trying to convince myself she was overreacting. Trying to convince myself my family wasn't capable of something darker. Then my phone vibrated. A message from Ethan. Simple. Casual. Perfectly timed. Family dinner tonight. Everyone's coming. My stomach tightened. Because suddenly it didn't feel like an invitation. It felt like attendance was required. The mansion looked unusually lively that evening. Every light was on. Music drifted through the main hall. Staff moved between rooms carrying wine and food. To an outsider, it looked like a celebration. Maybe it was. Just not for the reason I thought. My mother greeted me first. Too warmly. Too enthusiastically. Her smile lingered a little too long. Her questions sounded rehearsed. Every instinct I had began whispering the same warning. Something was wrong. Then I noticed Vanessa. She couldn't look directly at me. Not for more than a second. Each time our eyes met, hers drifted away. People avoiding guilt often avoid eye contact. At the time, I wasn't sure why. Now I know. Dinner lasted nearly 2 hours. The conversation never stayed in one place. Business. Travel. Investments. Family memories. Old stories. Everyone seemed strangely determined to keep things light. As if they were performing happiness. And Ethan? Ethan barely touched his food. Instead, he watched me. Not constantly. Just enough. Like a man monitoring weather conditions before a storm. Near the end of dinner, my grandmother surprised everyone. She pushed back her chair and stood. Slowly. Painfully. The arthritis in her knees had worsened over the years. But her mind remained sharp. Sharper than anyone realized. She looked directly at me. Then at the rest of the family. Something unreadable crossed her face. Something troubled. "Be careful who you trust," she said quietly. Then she sat back down. Nobody responded. Nobody laughed. Nobody asked what she meant. The room simply went silent. Looking back, I think she knew. Or at least suspected. Maybe she'd seen something. Maybe she'd heard something. Maybe she'd noticed the same cracks I was only beginning to see. Whatever the reason, those were the last words she spoke to me before the accident. Around 10 o'clock, Ethan suggested we take a drive. Just the two of us. Like old times. Fresh air. Scenic route. Time to reconnect. Under normal circumstances I would have refused. I was angry. Confused. Exhausted. But a part of me still loved him. A foolish part. The dangerous part. So I said yes. The road wound through the mountains north of the city. Dark forests surrounded us. Rain tapped lightly against the windshield. The farther we drove, the quieter Ethan became. Eventually even the radio fell silent. Only the sound of tires against wet pavement remained. Then my phone rang. Rebecca. Again. I answered immediately. Her voice sounded urgent. Almost frantic. "Claire, listen carefully." My pulse accelerated. "What happened?" "You need to get away from your family." The words hit like ice water. I glanced toward Ethan. His eyes remained fixed on the road. Expressionless. "Rebecca. They've already filed preliminary paperwork." My breath caught. "What paperwork?" Silence. Then. Death-related paperwork. Everything inside me stopped. For one impossible second. I couldn't process what she'd said. Death paperwork. Before my death. Then the call disconnected. No warning. No goodbye. Just silence. I looked at my screen. No signal. The mountains had swallowed the connection. "Ethan." My voice sounded different now. Smaller. Careful. "What exactly are we doing out here?" His hands tightened around the steering wheel. Only slightly. But I noticed. Then he smiled. A smile that never reached his eyes. "We're talking." My pulse began hammering. Hard. Fast. Relentless. The car finally stopped near an overlook. A narrow cliffside facing a dark valley below. Rain drifted through the night air. Fog clung to the trees. The entire landscape felt isolated from the world. Like a place where consequences disappeared. Vanessa was already there. Waiting. The moment I saw her, everything became clear. The affair. The account. The paperwork. The lies. The tension. The secrecy. Every piece suddenly fit together. "What is this?" I demanded. Neither answered immediately. That silence told me everything. Then Ethan spoke. Calmly. Almost kindly. "We tried to make this easier." Easier. The word felt obscene. Vanessa folded her arms. Rain darkened her coat. For the first time in my life, I saw absolutely no guilt in her face. Only resentment. Years of it. "You always had everything," she said. "You inherited everything." I stared at her. Speechless. She laughed once. A short, bitter sound. "You didn't earn any of it." The accusation hung in the air. Heavy. Ugly. Familiar. Because envy rarely begins with money. It begins with comparison. And Vanessa had spent her entire life comparing herself to me. Ethan stepped closer. The company needed stability. I almost laughed. The company is doing better than ever. He shook his head. No. Then he looked directly into my eyes. The company needed us. Us. Not me. Us. That single word revealed the entire plan. My heart pounded. Every instinct screamed the same command. Run. Now. Immediately. I took one step backward. Then another. Rain soaked my hair. Wind whipped across the cliffside. Vanessa noticed first. And suddenly her expression changed. Urgency. Fear. Desperation. Because they realized something important. I wasn't negotiating. I wasn't forgiving. I wasn't staying. I was leaving. And if I left, their entire plan collapsed. Everything happened at once. A movement. A struggle. A hand grabbing my arm. Another reaching for my shoulder. The ground slipping beneath my feet. Then. Nothing felt solid anymore. The world tilted. The cliff vanished. The sky spun. And I was falling. The last thing I saw before darkness swallowed everything was my sister standing at the edge. Watching. Not screaming. Not reaching. Not helping. Watching. And as the rain blurred her face, I realized something horrifying. She already believed I was dead. People imagine survival as something dramatic. A miracle. A triumphant moment. A second chance wrapped in gratitude. Reality is much uglier. Survival hurts. The first thing I felt was cold. Not emotional cold. Physical cold. The kind that settles into your bones and refuses to leave. Rainwater soaked through my clothes. Mud clung to my skin. Every breath felt like broken glass scraping my ribs. When I opened my eyes, darkness surrounded me. For several seconds, I couldn't understand where I was. The world tilted strangely. Branches hung above me. Wet leaves brushed against my face. The smell of earth filled my lungs. Then memory returned. The cliff. Vanessa. Ethan. The fall. A wave of pain exploded through my body. I tried to sit up. Instantly regretted it. My vision blurred. The forest spun. Nausea rolled through me. I collapsed back into the mud. Breathing hard. Trying not to lose consciousness again. Hours passed. Maybe longer. Time became impossible to measure. The storm eventually weakened. The rain softened. The sky slowly turned gray. Morning was coming. That was when I realized something important. I wasn't dead. But someone believed I was. And if Ethan and Vanessa reached me before help did, they would make sure the mistake was corrected. That thought kept me moving. Not courage. Not determination. Fear. Pure fear. I crawled. Sometimes on my hands and knees. Sometimes dragging myself through wet brush and fallen branches. Every movement felt impossible. Every yard gained felt borrowed. Eventually I found a narrow service road winding through the mountains. The sight nearly made me cry. Not because I was safe. Because I finally had a chance. An elderly couple discovered me nearly an hour later. Their pickup truck rounded a bend and stopped abruptly. I still remember the look on the woman's face when she climbed out. shock, concern, confusion. Dear God, she whispered. The next several days passed in fragments. Hospital lights, pain medication, doctors, questions, tests, more questions. Fortunately for me, the hospital was small, remote, far from the city, far from my family, far from the people searching for confirmation of my death. Unfortunately, that protection didn't last long. 3 days after the fall, I turned on a television and watched my own funeral announcement. The news anchor spoke calmly, professionally, respectfully, the way people discuss tragic stories that don't belong to them. Business executive Claire Mercer is presumed dead following a devastating mountain accident. Presumed dead. The words echoed inside my head. Then photographs appeared on screen. My photographs. Smiling. Speaking at charity events. Accepting business awards. Standing beside Ethan. Standing beside Vanessa. Standing beside people who already knew the truth. I couldn't breathe. Because suddenly I understood something. They weren't looking for me. They weren't hoping I'd survive. They were already moving on. The official narrative had begun. And once a story enters the world, people fight harder to protect it than the truth. Later that evening, a nurse entered my room carrying fresh linens. She was middle-aged. Quiet. Observant. The kind of person who notices more than she says. She paused after seeing the television. Then looked at me. Then back at the screen. Then at me again. The silence lasted several seconds. Finally she closed the door. Carefully. That's you. Not a question. A statement. For the first time since the accident, I told someone everything. Not because I trusted her. Because I was exhausted. Because carrying the truth alone felt impossible. Because I needed another human being to tell me I wasn't losing my mind. She listened without interrupting. Without judging. Without questioning. When I finished, she sat quietly beside the bed. Thinking. Then she said something that changed everything. If they're willing to bury you while you're alive. She folded her hands. They'll be watching hospitals. A chill moved through me. Because she was right. Of course she was right. If Ethan believed there was even a 1% chance I survived, he would search. Not publicly. Privately. Quietly. Professionally. The nurse introduced herself as Margaret. She had worked emergency medicine for nearly 30 years. She'd seen enough human behavior to recognize danger when it appeared. And she believed I was in danger. 3 nights later. She proved it. Around midnight, she entered my room carrying a tablet. Her expression looked different. Tighter. More serious. Without speaking, she handed it to me. A security camera image filled the screen. Hospital reception. Earlier that evening. A man stood near the front desk asking questions. Wearing a dark coat. Baseball cap. Head lowered. At first I didn't recognize him. Then my stomach dropped. One of Ethan's private security consultants. A former investigator his company hired occasionally. A man who had absolutely no reason to be there. Except to find me. Margaret didn't waste words. You're out of time. The next morning, I disappeared. Officially. Completely. Margaret arranged everything. Transportation. Cash. Temporary identification. A place to stay. To this day, I still don't understand why she helped me. Maybe she saw a frightened woman. Maybe she believed justice mattered. Maybe she simply couldn't stand bullies. Whatever the reason, she saved my life. For the next 2 weeks, I lived like a ghost. Small motels. Quiet towns. No social media. No banking activity. No phone calls. No digital footprint. Every morning I studied news reports, company filings, financial records, legal notices, anything connected to my family. And what I discovered was worse than the attempted murder. Because Ethan wasn't merely taking control of my assets. He was taking control of my identity. Insurance policies had already been activated. Corporate authority had already shifted. Properties were being transferred. Trust agreements were being amended. Board meetings were being scheduled. Everything moved with astonishing speed. As if the paperwork had been prepared long before my accident. Because it had. Then one night, I found something that made my blood run cold. A confidential corporate memo. Leaked online by mistake. Deleted minutes later. But not before I downloaded it. Most people would have missed the significance. I didn't. One sentence stood out. Buried inside pages of legal language. Public appearance scheduled following medical recovery presentation. Medical recovery presentation. The phrase made no sense. Not until I enlarged an attached photograph. Then the world stopped. A woman stood beside Ethan. Smiling. Wearing sunglasses. Hair styled exactly like mine. Same height. Same build. Same posture. At first glance, she looked like me. At second glance, she looked terrifying. Because she wasn't me. Someone had spent enormous money turning a stranger into my reflection. I stared at the image for nearly an hour. Unable to look away. The offshore account. The insurance fraud. The death paperwork. The funeral. It finally connected. They didn't just want me gone. They wanted a replacement. A living version of me they could control. A woman who would sign whatever they placed in front of her. A woman who would never ask questions. A woman who could help steal everything I built. That's when revenge stopped being my motivation. Because revenge is emotional. This became practical. If that woman appeared publicly as Claire Mercer, the truth could disappear forever. I needed proof. Evidence. Witnesses. Access. And there was only one place all three existed. The Mercer family mansion. The place where my funeral photographs now decorated the walls. The place where my husband slept peacefully. The place where my sister celebrated my absence. The place nobody would ever expect me to return. 3 days later, I dyed my hair dark brown. Bought inexpensive glasses. Learned a softer speaking voice. And submitted an application for a night nursing position. The patient requiring overnight care? My grandmother. The only member of the family who had warned me before the fall. The irony almost made me smile. Because while the world searched for Claire Mercer was about to walk straight back into her own home. As someone else. And she was about to discover what her family did when they believed nobody was watching. The Mercer mansion looked exactly the same. That was the first thing that hurt. Not the betrayal. Not the lies. The familiarity. The stone driveway curved beneath ancient oak trees. The fountain still flowed near the entrance. The same brass lanterns glowed beside the front doors. The same home where I learned to ride a bicycle. The same home where my father taught me chess. The same home where my family had decided I was worth more dead than alive. I arrived carrying a single overnight bag. My forged employment documents identified me as Eleanor Reed. Night nurse. 42 years old. Widowed. Recently relocated. Invisible. Exactly what I needed to be. The head housekeeper barely looked at me. The agency had already handled the paperwork. The family was desperate for overnight care. Apparently grief had made them too busy to notice details. Or perhaps they simply weren't expecting the dead to ring the doorbell. My grandmother's room occupied the east wing. Far from the master suite. Far from the guest rooms. Far from the people who had tried to erase me. When I entered her room for the first time, she looked smaller. Frilier. Older. But her eyes remained sharp. Dangerously sharp. For several seconds she studied me. Long enough that my pulse began racing. Then she smiled. Just slightly. Leave us. She spoke to the housekeeper. Not to me. The moment we were alone, she looked directly into my eyes. You're late. My breath caught. She knew. Immediately. Tears burned behind my eyes. The first genuine tears I'd shed since the accident. Grandma. She squeezed my hand. I knew you'd come back. For a long moment neither of us spoke. The silence felt sacred. Like finding water after crossing a desert. Then her expression hardened. They think they're clever. Her voice dropped. But clever people become careless when they believe they've won. And that was exactly what had happened. Over the following weeks, I became part of the house. A shadow. A background figure. Someone people stopped noticing. During the day I slept in a small staff apartment. At night I cared for my grandmother. And listened. Listening turned out to be more valuable than spying. Because guilty people talk. Especially when they think they're safe. The first major mistake came from my mother. One rainy evening she entered my grandmother's room carrying tea. She assumed I was asleep in the adjacent sitting area. I wasn't. Everything should be finalized next month. My grandmother remained silent. The merger. Silence again. Once Claire signs. The words froze me. Not if Claire signs. When Claire signs. Because in their minds, the imposter already was Claire. My grandmother finally spoke. You're talking about a stranger. My mother's jaw tightened. No. She looked away. She's close enough. Close enough. I would remember those words forever. Because that was the moment I realized something. My family hadn't merely stolen my identity. They had convinced themselves identity didn't matter. That people could be replaced like furniture. Like signatures. Like assets. And once people start thinking that way, they become capable of almost anything. The next mistake came from Vanessa. She began drinking. More than usual. Guilt doesn't always arrive immediately. Sometimes it waits until victory becomes quiet. One night she wandered into the library after midnight. Half asleep. Half drunk. Completely unaware I was organizing medication nearby. She sat beside the fireplace. Staring into the flames. Then she whispered something I never forgot. I didn't think she'd actually fall. The room went completely still. My heart pounded so hard I could hear it. Vanessa buried her face in her hands. We were supposed to scare her. She laughed bitterly. That's what he promised. He. Not we. He. Interesting. Very interesting. Because suddenly the story looked different. Not better. Not cleaner. Just more complicated. Ethan had been directing everything. And Vanessa? Perhaps she'd been manipulated as thoroughly as everyone else. That realization didn't erase what she'd done. But it changed the shape of it. The biggest discovery arrived 3 weeks later. During a storm. Rain hammered the windows. Thunder rolled above the mansion. The entire house seemed wrapped in darkness. Ethan and the imposter were practicing. Practicing being me. I watched from an upstairs hallway. Hidden behind a partially open door. The woman sat at my old desk. Wearing my favorite color. Using my handwriting samples. Repeating phrases from old interviews. My stomach twisted. Because she wasn't mocking me. She was terrified. Every mistake made Ethan angry. Every hesitation triggered criticism. Every question was dismissed. Eventually she broke. I can't keep doing this. Ethan leaned forward. Calm. Cold. You don't have a choice. The woman looked ready to cry. You said nobody was hurt. Silence. Then Ethan answered. Nobody important. Something inside me turned to ice. Because for the first time, I saw the entire machine. Not greed. Not passion. Not love. Control. Pure control. Ethan didn't love Vanessa. He didn't value my mother. He certainly never loved me. Everyone around him existed only as pieces on a board. And suddenly I understood why he seemed so calm during my funeral. Because he wasn't grieving. He was managing an investment. The next morning I followed him. Carefully. Patiently. He drove into the city. Visited a private storage facility. Accessed a secured unit. Stayed inside for 22 minutes. Then left. That night I returned. Alone. Breaking in took less time than expected. Inside the storage unit sat dozens of document boxes. Hard drives. Legal folders. Insurance files. Bank records. And at the very back. A locked fireproof safe. The safe contained everything. Every transfer. Every forged authorization. Every fraudulent policy. Every communication. And one additional document. A recorded contingency agreement. Ethan's signature. Vanessa's signature. My mother's signature. Dated 2 months before the accident. The room seemed to spin. Because this wasn't panic. This wasn't opportunity. They had planned my death long before I discovered the offshore account. I copied everything. Every document. Every recording. Every file. Enough evidence to destroy them. Or so I thought. Because when I returned to the mansion, someone was waiting. Ethan. Standing inside my grandmother's room. Looking directly at me. His expression was calm. Almost curious. Like a hunter finally spotting movement in tall grass. Eleanor. He smiled. Or should I call you Claire? The blood drained from my face. Because after weeks of hiding. Weeks of planning. Weeks of watching. The most dangerous man in my life had finally realized the ghost in his house was real. Part 5, The Boardroom Resurrection. For several seconds neither of us moved. Rain tapped softly against the windows. My grandmother watched from her bed. Silent. Observant. Waiting. Then Ethan smiled. Not shocked. Not angry. Prepared. I was wondering when you'd show yourself. My stomach tightened. Because that sentence revealed something terrifying. He hadn't just discovered me. He suspected me already. The game had been running on both sides. But unlike him, I had evidence. And unlike him, I wasn't alone anymore. My grandmother opened a drawer beside her bed, removed a small digital recorder, and placed it on the blanket. Ethan's confidence vanished. For the first time. Just slightly. But enough. Because he recognized it. Months of conversations. Confessions. Arguments. Planning sessions. Recorded. Saved. Protected. His expression hardened. You don't understand what you're doing. My grandmother laughed. A dry, tired laugh. Actually. She looked directly at him. I finally do. The next morning was merger day. The largest corporate meeting in company history. Investors. Board members. Legal advisors. Media representatives. And one carefully prepared imposter ready to sign away everything I owned. Ethan believed he still had control. He didn't know the police already possessed copies of the evidence. He didn't know federal investigators had reviewed the insurance fraud. He didn't know my attorney Rebecca had quietly rebuilt the entire case. Most importantly, he didn't know I was about to walk through the front door. The boardroom overlooked the city skyline. Sunlight reflected across glass towers. Camera crews waited outside. Executives reviewed documents. Lawyers whispered over contracts. At the center sat the imposter. Nervous. Pale. Clearly exhausted. Ethan stood beside her. Confident. Almost victorious. Then the doors opened. And I walked in. Silence hit the room instantly. Chairs stopped moving. Conversations died. Breaths caught. One board member actually dropped a pen. Because dead women aren't supposed to attend corporate meetings. Ethan stared. Frozen. Vanessa turned white. My mother looked like she might collapse. And the imposter? She burst into tears. Genuine tears. Relieved tears. The tears of someone finally seeing a way out. I wasn't alone. Behind me entered police investigators. My attorney. My grandmother. And 2 federal agents. The evidence followed shortly afterward. Audio recordings. Financial records. Insurance fraud documentation. Forgery evidence. Transfer records. Witness statements. One by one. Piece by piece. The illusion collapsed. Not dramatically. Quietly. Relentlessly. The way truth usually wins. Ethan attempted explanations. Then arguments. Then accusations. None worked. Facts are stubborn things. Vanessa cried. My mother begged. The imposter confessed everything. Including the blackmail. Including the threats. Including the promises Ethan made. By afternoon, the arrests began. By evening, the news channels had the entire story. The millionaire heiress who survived. The family conspiracy. The identity fraud. The attempted murder investigation. The headlines spread everywhere. Yet strangely, I felt nothing. Not triumph. Not revenge. Not satisfaction. Only exhaustion. Because when betrayal ends, healing doesn't begin immediately. First comes grief. Grief for the people you thought existed. Grief for the family you never truly had. Months later, the trials concluded. Convictions followed. Sentences were handed down. Appeals failed. And eventually, silence returned. Real silence. Not the fearful silence of secrets. The peaceful silence of truth. One evening I sat alone in my office. The same office that once felt stolen. The same skyline beyond the windows. The same city below. A news report played softly on television, covering the final sentencing. I watched for a moment, then switched it off. Because for the first time in a very long time, their story no longer belonged to me. Mine did. Outside, the city lights shimmered against the night sky. Inside, everything was finally still. I wasn't the woman who fell from the cliff. I wasn't the woman buried in an empty coffin. I wasn't the ghost walking through dark hallways. I was simply Claire Mercer. Alive. Free. And finally, home.